Hello everyone, this is Niharika. Today we have with us Lakshika Sachdev. To quickly introduce her, she recently concluded with her Juris Doctor program from the University at Buffalo School of Law. After her bachelor's, she has gained diverse experience and has worked for a variety of organizations, including a top-tier law firm in India, a government law office chamber, a state senator's office, law enforcement agencies, an NGO, and a research organization. In this session, she will guide us about the do's and don'ts for a Juris Doctor program from abroad. We are very glad that she could join us and talk about her journey. Lakshika, I request you to please introduce yourself in short, and then we can begin with the session.
Hi, Niharika. Hi, everybody else. Thank you so much for having me here. To be honest, I think more than everybody else, I was waiting for this opportunity to share my experience because along the way, so many people have guided me, helped me, literally in everything from getting jobs to preparing my personal statements, going through the whole process, just giving me all the sort of guidance that I needed, and I couldn't have done it without them. And I'm so glad that I'm in a position where I can actually share it with other people and help them out with their journeys and processes.
Right. So directly delving in our questions. So you have worked as an associate in a law firm after your graduation, practiced in a
That's
court
right.
as well. And after a while, and after that, you have opted for a Juris Doctor program. So how did your career take shape all this while? And was opting for this program always a part of your plan?
So I think when I was in law school back in India, like most other students, an LLM was always a part of the plan. You know, to go to the US or go to the UK, get international exposure. And, it's just like any other regular law student, it was a part of my plan too. With my first job in a law firm, it started because I was interning at the firm. One of the partners had been my mentor for a few years, and my internship converted into a full-time job. And I think after a year and a half, or maybe like 2 years or something, I moved on to work with one of the additional Solicitor Generals in Delhi. That was not so much a part of the plan, but I was looking for a different opportunity, and I had interned with a Solicitor General back in law school. So when that opportunity presented itself, I was like, wow, doing this full time, working at the Supreme Court is going to be amazing. So I just couldn't say no. The variety of matters, the whole vibe, if I may use the word, of working at the Supreme Court, and the learning experience, the learning curve is just, it's amazing. So that was just how my career took shape, and doing an LLM at some point was definitely a part of my plan. I knew I wanted to spend a few years working before I could decide on what kind of specialization I wanted to do in an LLM. So that's why the LLM had to wait till I could get some work exposure and decide what field of law I wanted to work in.
Right. Could you please talk about the application process at the University of Buffalo School of Law for international students, and how should one prepare for the same? And if you could also talk about any challenges which you faced during your application procedures and how you handled them.
Okay, so I applied when we were in the COVID lockdown. So that means I basically had more time than applicants usually would have around that time, because most people are either working or already in school while they're doing these applications. So the process is similar to what any school would have for LLMs. You put together your personal statement, you get letter of recommendations. For that, every school has different requirements. Some schools may just require one, some may require two, some may require three plus. I think for UB is University at Buffalo. So when I say UB, that's what it means. UB, I think, required two to three, out of which one had to be an academic recommendation, and one had to be a professional letter of recommendation. So that component is, I think, standard for most schools, getting a personal statement and LOR. Aside from that, you can opt for a waiver for the English language requirement. Some people take the TOEFL or IELTS, and some schools generally waive that requirement. Because I was applying during the COVID time, UB did not give me a waiver, but they also did not ask me to take the TOEFL because, doing that remotely was not working out. So I took the Duolingo at home English test. And that was pretty easy. I think most of us have studied all our lives in English. We go to the court, speak in English, and present papers in English. So that's really not a challenge. But that's a personal choice. Like I dropped out of applying to some schools because they specifically needed me to take the TOEFL, and I wasn't very comfortable taking the exam during the lockdown. So I refrained from those schools. Apart from that, transcripts are a big part of your application process. Depending on what law school you go to, the procedure can take, I think, 6 to 8 weeks. If you're in a private law school, then I think it's an easier process. But people who go to DU or people who go to University of Mumbai or University at Pune, it's a whole process. So the sooner you start, the better it is. Um, like I said, every school will have different requirements in terms of applications. Some of those requirements may be that the school requires certain documents to be sent to them directly from the recommenders or from the universities. So UB did not have anything like that, but because UB's application went through the LSAC, LSAC is the body which basically collects all your application documents and sends it to the schools that you want to apply for. It's basically kind of like a bank of your documents. And then they make a report of your application and send it. So LSAC usually requires that transcripts should be sent to them directly from the university and they should not be coming from you. That could get challenging in particular because some universities, some colleges may not be very well open to sending international mails and international postages because of the cost associated with it. So one way to navigate that is to pay an extra fee if that's a college procedure. Some colleges may have a postal unit within the college campus, so you can accompany one of the college officials to take the sealed envelope and post it from there, and in person, like, pay charges to the post office or the courier person who's on the campus. That's one of the ways to get it done. Mumbai University, for example, has an online process, so they don't mail it physically; they will mail it electronically. Pune University, on the other hand, has a post office on the campus, so an official will come along with you, and drop it off at the post box, and you just pay the fee, and it's done. So basically, you're not violating the rule; you're working around it to make things work. The whole reason they do that is basically they don't want applicants to possibly tamper with the seal of the university and change their grades in the transcript. And then the most challenging part, apart from getting these things done, was my personal statement. I started off with reading other personal statements, other people who were willing to share it with me. I don't know if that was the bad decision or a best decision. I can't really comment. Like, some people say that you should start with your own thoughts and not get clouded by other people's writing. That is one thing, but at the same time, hadn't really written for a law school person. I hadn't really written a draft for a law school personal statement before. So I think it did help me to understand, what are some good things and what are some bad things, and how people are, what is their style of writing. So I think that's a good point to start, but it's also a lengthy procedure. I think I wrote down a draft of some 20, 30 pages with all my life experiences that were worth talking about in a personal interview. That's how I saw it. And then I narrowed down to what could be relevant to law or what could be relevant to my decision about, studying a JD or studying the law. And then I tailored it down, and then I had it reviewed by at least 5 or 6 people. It went through a certain number of rounds of reviews. And yeah, then I finally brought it within the within the word limit that was specified by the school.
Right. So, what is it like to go to a school that isn't a top 20 or an Ivy League school? Because if we are going abroad, we are always hoping that we get into one.
Okay, you caught me there. I was one of those people who thought that, oh my God, if I'm spending that kind of money, even if it's scholarship money, if I'm, going to take that time out of my career to go and study, I either want to go to like a Harvard or a Columbia or NYU or, one of those top schools. And to be honest, I did apply to a good number of schools. I had more than, I think, 7 applications. to different schools in the US and Canada. I got accepted by most of them. Two or three I did not get into, but most of them I got accepted into. And then I was in the process of, a friend of mine gave me the suggestion that before you come to the States, speak to people who are in your field, not students, but people who are working, so that you get an idea of what their experience is like, and you can make decisions accordingly. So I was in that process. I was speaking to people who had done LLMs, and I came across someone who had done a 2 year JD. And I was like, wow, this person really has the time. He spent like 3 years. And then he was like, no, it was a 2 year GD. And I'm like, how does that work? And he told me all about it. And I was like, okay. So I went online. I looked at all the schools that offer it. And I think there are roughly 20 to 30 schools that offer that program. I narrowed it down because I did not want to take the LSAT. I was already in my application procedure phase. I was not going to wait another year to write the law school admissions test and then apply the next year. So I was like, I'm just going to narrow it down. And then my options came down to UB and University of Arizona Law School. The reason I had these two schools down was because one, they did not require the LSAT, and two, because the fee was much affordable as compared to any other law school in the United States. So that was also a big factor because obviously, some of us have savings, some of us have parents, some of us have loans. It was a combination of all of those things for me. So I just wanted to make a smart decision that way. What prompted me to look at, schools beyond the T20 was that there were professionals I spoke to who graduated from these schools, had full-time jobs, were earning well, they were settled into the visa process and everything. And then on the other hand, I had friends who went to Harvard and Columbia and NYU and all these other big schools. And as heartbreaking as it is, those people tried their best but could not either land jobs or faced visa sponsorship issues and had to come back. Now, visa sponsorship issues are completely independent of the school selection. But at the same time, if you're going to a top tier school, you're spending about 70 to $80,000 per year only in tuition. So I was like, what if that happens to me? So I have to find something that's cost effective. So UB and Arizona were two of my choices because the tuition was much, much lesser. Plus, they had good scholarship offerings for international students specifically. So that really attracted me. Now, as far as the experience of going to one of these schools, is that I think each and every one of my professor either graduated from a Harvard or a Columbia or an NYU or a U Chicago or one of the other top 5 to top 10 schools. They're all research scholars. Um, they've all published books. They've all either been great at research or they've worked at top top law firms in the US or magic circle firms. Some of them. So I think professors were amazing. I think they had the same amount of qualifications as anybody else who went to any of these top law schools. The only difference would be classroom discussion. That quality of discussion may be better at the top 20 schools, but for somebody, for somebody who's making this decision, you also need to take into consideration your wants and needs in terms of classroom discussions. There are some people who don't enjoy it. There are some people who like it. So those are things that you should take into factor. And obviously, like any place that you get admitted into, there are going to be sample classes that you can do online. You basically sit in classes that are being recorded. You actually get FaceTime with the professor and the classroom discussions. I think that's very important because you can actually see it for real how it happens, and then you can kind of judge. And obviously every year the batch is going to change, students will change, their intellectual capabilities are different, and the discussion can go from here to here or here to here. So again, nothing is set on those lines, but those are good parameters that you should take into consideration when you're thinking about considering a school that's not a top school. And again, it's not necessary that if you get into Harvard, you're going to be equally participative or you would make sense of every discussion that's happening. If you take an international trade law class and you have no idea, and the other 8 to 10 people in that class are like masters who already, people have practiced in that area, I don't know how much you can benefit. You will benefit, definitely. There's nothing to lose. But I don't know to what extent you will. And that's something that uh, every person needs to every person needs to gauge for themselves when they make that decision. In terms of courses, the first year, at least for JD, the first year is pretty much standard throughout the states. It's the elective courses. Now that's up to you. You can study IPR, or you can study arbitration, or you can study crim law. That's up to you. That will literally, that's not something that's set by the school. Everybody has like a great range of courses that they're offering, and I can almost guarantee this, that you are going to get confused as to what course to take and what not to take, because there are so many nice courses, and there's also going to be some courses that you're not interested in, but you will be interested in more courses than you're allowed to take. So yeah, I think it's not a bad thing to go to a school that is not a top 20 school. And these schools also have advantages in the sense that, for example, in UB, except for UBs, obviously, we're in the state of New York, and New York City is a part of it. And New York City itself has a lot of schools, and that New York is like a big city. It has the most number of opportunities. So you're looking at great amount of competition. But if you go to smaller schools, you are avoiding all of that competition, at least to start off with, to have a job and to be able to earn in dollars and pay off your student loans and to make some savings before if you have to go back home. I think smaller schools have that advantage, is that locally there are good opportunities where you can get hired. And at least for the state of New York, like Buffalo is in Western New York. So the whole of Western New York, the whole of Central New York, the whole of Northern New York looks to UB as a school to hire law graduates from. So I think that was one of my major, I think, deciding factors. And I spoke to the career services officers before I came here. They actually pulled out data of their placement rates, especially placement rates for international students. And the 3-year data that I got from them was, if there were 20 international students, a minimum of 16 to 17 had full-time jobs. I think that's wonderful. Um, Again, everybody wants to be in New York City, but if not New York City, it's better to have a job in a smaller city instead of not having a job at all, and spending dollars when your income is really in rupees or you're drawing from loans. So those are critical factors that I took into consideration. I was not open to thinking about all of that because I was like, no, I want to go to a top law school. But I am very happy that I made that decision, to be honest, because it was really practical, and it's really gotten me where I am today. So I'm very happy about those, and I would really, really encourage other people to think about this. It's fine, you don't have to make the same decisions as I did, but please take into consideration all these things because they are important.
That makes absolutely a lot of sense to everyone, I believe. So could you explain the key differences between a JD and an LLM, if any? And what are the key factors that one should keep in mind while choosing them? If you could, and if you could also talk about the employment advantages of a JD over an LLM.
Okay, I'm going to answer this in parts.
Right.
First, I'll tell you what my understanding of an LLM and a JD is, and then people can draw differences from that. LLM is good if you don't want to spend too much time, and LLM is amazing if you don't want to work. If you're sure you just want to come here, get the exposure, get understanding or get deeper understanding of one particular area of law, I think LLMs are the way to go. Um, and they are shorter courses. They say 1 year, but it's actually a 9 to 10 month program. So you're rummaging through like a lot of courses through 9 and 10 months. I think most law schools would require you to have maybe like 4 to 5 courses each semester, and they'll always have some mandatory courses, like you need to study ethics, because if you plan to take the bar, you have to have ethics as a subject, legal ethics and professionalism. Um, They will always make you take a legal writing and analysis and research class, because the way um, lawyers in different countries do their legal writing and analysis and research do is very different from what they do over here. I took that course too. So apart from those courses, there may be some school required mandatory courses. Otherwise, it's optional. And this is for JD and LLM both. There are some mandatory courses and some electives that you can take. But in an LLM, like I said, primarily, I think if you want to learn deeper about just one area of law, or if you just want to come here for a year and get that exposure and get that experience of being in a different country and working with people from different country, that's great. And if you're sure you don't want to work here at all, then I think it's a good option, time wise, cost wise, because LLM and JD fees is almost the same. It's just that in JD you'll be paying the same fee you'll have to pay that same fee twice or thrice depending on a 2 year or a 3 year JD. Whereas in LLM you're just paying it for 1 year. Having said that, an LLM will not hamper you from getting a job. There are people who do LLMs, have gotten jobs in amazing law firms and government sector and all of those things. LLM is not going to stop you, but if we're generalizing, a JD is more preferable in terms of job placements over an LLM. It's the same thing. Like, assume you are a law firm partner who's hiring an associate, and there's a guy who say comes from the US or the UK who's been in India, who wants to stay in India, decides to do an LLM in India and practice law. And then you have someone coming out of like a law school in India, just got out of his LLB. Now this foreign person has 3 to 4 years of experience and only has done an LLM in India, but this other person just did LLB. Chances are you're going to want to pick the LLB guy, even if he has no work experience. Because over a period of 5 years of law school, or like 3 plus 3 years of law school, they've studied more subjects. And secondly, they've been here all their lives. They know how the society works. They will know some things, or maybe a lot of things that a foreigner would not know. So that brings me back to JD. You are the foreigner in this scenario. If you do an LLM, you have to be crazy good to be able to convince an employer to tell them, hey, I'm a foreigner, I've studied here for 1 year, I know everything about American law, pick me over another person who's done a JD, right? So it is a practical choice. And again, that also differs from what kind of LLM you're doing. If you're someone who's practiced corporate law in India for a few years, you come here and you do a specialization in business laws or corporate laws or something like that, or like capital markets or security markets, things like that. That experience I've heard is, again, I've not practiced those areas of law, but from what I've heard, those are the most transferable. So if you're in those fields of law and you continue to work in those fields, an LLM would be really beneficial to you. And maybe you don't need a GD to get a job, because your job experience will be fully, or at least almost fully, transferable. Whereas if you're someone who's been in litigation, employers will see some transferability, in terms of strategy, in terms of, understanding how procedures work and everything. But at the same time, at the end of the day, your writing changes, your research style changes, court rules are very different, procedures are very different for federal and for state proceedings. So it's a whole different arena. Your soft skills, see, I'm not saying none of it will go for any of it will go for a waste, but not everything is transferable. There may be some skill sets that are transferable, some are not. In that situation, it's always better to go for a JD, because not only in a JD are you learning more law, and when I say that, I literally mean it. You're learning more law because you're taking more courses. I mean, of course, if you take a meditation course, you're not going to learn about the law. That's an option, by the way, in a lot of colleges. They will offer yoga and meditation as an option. So it depends what you study. But if you're taking law related courses, if you're studying 10 courses, you at least get a background. You don't become a master by just taking a course, but you at least have a background. And if you're studying for 2 years or for 3 years, whichever type of JD you do, you're spending that much time in the society over here. So you will learn how people talk, how people think, what they mean when they say certain phrases. All these things, along with networking and studying in a period of 9 to 10 months for an LLM student, is going to be far more difficult and far more stressful, which a JD student can avoid. Additionally, when you're doing a 2 year JD or a 3 year JD, you get 2 summers in between, which means internships. And a lot of people in India may be familiar with something called as VAC schemes or vacation schemes that a lot of foreign law firms offer to law students. But that is the base model in America, from what I've seen. Like at least from mid-sized to top law firms, they have that in place that they will have a summer associate who will come for the first summer, will come back for the second summer, and then ultimately get a job. They may or may not offer a job, but mostly the model is to hire from your summer associate class. And now, if even if you're in a 2 year JD, you still have that one summer, which is 3 full months of full-time employment. So at least the employer that you're working with will get a chance to see what you work like, what your mannerisms are, what your etiquettes are. And there is a good chance they will hire you. If they have a requirement for the next year, there's a good chance they'll hire you instead of somebody who's just coming out of law school and they have no idea about. See, writing samples are a good indication for sure, but mostly people submit writing samples that you've written in school. Maybe you've gotten better over the period of the year, you know. So those things can happen. And one advice that I have for people who are coming to the US from India is that if and when you're in a position where you're interviewing for an internship, please ask this question. It may seem awkward, it may seem too direct, but do it for your own good. Ask the employer whether you are going to be in consideration for a full-time job. Nobody is going to guarantee that you're going to walk out of that internship with a full-time offer. That's not going to happen. But at least ask them if they're going to consider you. And people are honest about it. From at least in my experience, some employers have told me that, listen, we are not sure about this. When we hire next year, we'll know and you can apply that time. And then there are some people who've straight up told me that our company policies or our law firm policies do not allow us to, sponsor full-time visas for international candidates. So you can work here as an intern, but I don't think we can hire you full-time. So those places are automatically off my list. As much as I wanted to work there, I had to leave that out because I had one summer to find myself an employment. So that I think is the major difference. Circling back to your question about LLMs and JDs, it's the difference between the time you spend over here, the amount of courses you can take, the kind of internships you can do along the way. And mind you, some internships may pay well enough for you to be able to cover your tuition fee for at least one semester. So that's also an added advantage. Now, just to fully complete that question, with a 3 year and 2 year JD, um, again, time is something that has to be taken into consideration, and cost. You could be spending the same amount of money for 2 years, or you could be spending it for 3 years, like 3 times or 2 times, depending on how much time and money you have. Um, I think the only disadvantage I feel as a 2 year JD is that you may not be able to take enough number of courses. And secondly, you don't get 2 summer internships. And three, there are some law firms that absolutely require you to do both summer internships with them. So for them, maybe you're not the candidate. But there are a great number of law firms, like top law firms, big law, that will welcome you to come for that one summer and then, maybe offer you a job if you're good. And when you start interviewing for these places, you can just leverage your Indian law experience. It's all how you present yourself, right? So I've seen people just do one internship and then end up with jobs at like very big law firms. So that's a possibility too. So I hope I've answered your question, although a little too much in detail, but I think that, in my opinion, is the difference between the two.
All right. So a lot of people don't apply to go abroad because of the costs that are involved, because of low employment chances and the visa sponsorship issues. So could you talk about the cost involved in the entire JD program as an international student? And if you could also talk about navigating the entire visa process.
Okay. So starting with costs of application completely depends of how many schools you're applying to. Usually each school would charge you, I think this is all for the fall 2021 application prices that I'm talking about. It could have gone up now. I have no idea about that. Usually for your LSAC is the account that you create where you send your documents to be forwarded to the school. LSAC alone takes up roughly $200 to $300 because there are two services that international students usually require. One is document assembly, and there is one other service that you need for them to convert your Indian scores into American GPA and verify that your scores are correct and all of that stuff. So that is around $200 to $300. If you're taking the TOEFL exam or the IELTS, I'm not sure about the IELTS cost, but TOEFL is roughly $120 or $150 in that range. And every school will have its own application fee. So in addition to LSAC and TOEFL, you can expect to spend $90 to $100 per school that you apply to. Some schools will offer that waiver if you can request it for whatever reason, for financial need or because your application is too good for them to pass it up, things like that. If you can, their website will have all the details on the grounds that you can claim a waiver for. UB did not have an application fee when I was applying. So I had already paid for LSAC, but I did not have to pay the school application fee for UB. So that is something that you can look up from the school's website. Aside from that, there's obviously costs of the visa. I think a US visa, student visa, should cost about $150. I'm going to speak in dollars because the currency rate keeps fluctuating. So it's best to speak in dollar amounts. And then flight tickets, obviously, the first time you go, then you come back, all of that. That will vary as to which city you're going to, how many connecting flights, and all of that. As far as school costs go, most schools will have a tuition fee of roughly $70,000 per annum. And then there will be living costs and book costs and health insurance and all of those things. So for UB, and I think for even University of Arizona, as I mentioned before, that these are two of the most cost-effective schools throughout the US. There may be more in that range, I'm not sure, but at least these two, so far as I can remember, the per annum tuition fee was roughly around $35,000. So that's literally half of what you're going to be paying at any other school. And then I think they both have good scholarship programs, especially UB does. They offer very good scholarships to international students. And that is something that should be kept in mind. And these are scholarships, like, I don't think UB had a separate scholarship program or like a separate application for it. I think they automatically consider you for it if you mention it in your application. Or if you just speak to the admissions office while you're in the process of applying, they can guide you on how to go about that. Apart from that, there are living costs. So again, depending on what city you're in, if you're in a place like New York, you may want to live in New Jersey and save on your rent, maybe share a room with some people. If you're in Boston, you're probably again going to stay close to school, but not too close because rents closer to school are usually high. If you take up on-campus living, that is more expensive as compared to off-campus. And in places like Buffalo, the rents are much cheaper. So you can expect, like, I'm going to specify rent amounts specific to Buffalo because I have personal knowledge of this. You can expect to spend $400 a month in rent. You can expect to spend about $200 on your utilities, Wi-Fi, gas, and electricity. Excuse me. And then no matter how much you try, you are going to end up eating outside because your class schedule is going to be such you're not always going to be able to cook at home. So you can expect to spend somewhere between $15 to $20 unless you're eating at McDonald's, which could be as low as $2. So that's really a personal choice. I think on an average, if you go to UB, you can expect to spend, if you don't have a scholarship, which is hardly ever the case, but if you're here, you can expect to spend, I think, roughly, $50,000 a year, including tuition, because like roughly 35 is your tuition. And then I'm anticipating not more than $1,000 or maybe $1,500 a month. So that's the cost at UB. But again, these are all variable costs, because of scholarships, because of currency exchange rates, and depending on how you live your lifestyle. There are people who would like to go out every weekend, eat out, drink, all of that. And then there are people who really live their life in a minimal manner. So again, it all depends on you, but roughly, yeah, those are the costs. For books, there are going to be some courses that will require you to mandatorily purchase a book. So a book could be anywhere between $200 to $300. But most law schools will have, the law school library will have online access. So if your professor permits you, and most professors do, there may be some who are not okay with that, but most professors would be okay with you using the digital version. So that way you can save costs. And there is something called as making an outline. So professors expect, because mostly exams are open book over here, you're expected to consolidate your entire course into a 50-page outline so that you can brush up on everything before your final exams. So I think by the time you're, in your final exam stage, um, you'll have your own mini book. So you're not going to rely so much on the digital version if that's a problem for you. A second thing that I learned was renting books. Renting books is always cheaper than buying a new book. It's also better because why waste it? Because you're not going to use it the next year. So that's one way of saving cost. Insurance, usually schools will have their own insurance program for international students. You can get outside insurance, but it's preferable to get the school one because sometimes, God forbid, if you're in a situation where you have to use the insurance coverage, the outside insurance may not cover, and then it's going to burn a hole in your pocket. So it's better to just go with the school insurance because usually school insurance programs are really good. I hope that covers the cost question. So far as visa sponsorship goes, so when you start first, you are obviously paying the student visa fee before you come to the States. After you come here, you're only allowed to be studying and working on campus for 20 hours. You can't take off campus jobs, those are illegal. But there are going to be these internships that I spoke about in the summers. So that happens on a visa program called the CPT, which is Curriculum Practical Training. Some schools will require you to pay an additional fee to process your documents for a CPT. That's not a very high fee. I think it's somewhere around $50 to $100, depends on the school. And because it's curriculum practical training, it is tied to a course. You can't go and do an internship if it is not relating to your curriculum. For example, you're coming here to study law. There's got to be some course that your school will have where you can show that, okay, this internship is required for this course. It could just be a practical training course. You can't just go out, work as a salesman in like a mall or take up an engineering job because that doesn't relate to your studies, correct? So that's one cost that comes in. Is because there's also a course that relates to it. There's going to be a course tuition fee, like fee for those credits. It depends on how many credits those are. Some schools will require you to take only one credit, some will require you to take 3 credits, and some schools may have a flat fee course wise, some schools may have per credit fee. I think UB had a flat fee for credits. You can take as many as you want, um, subject to the maximum cap, which was 16 credits. But yeah, I think every school differs in that manner. And then after your graduation, that 1 year visa that people get for their jobs is called the that's called the optional practical training or something like that. It's called the OPT basically. To process your OPT, there are fees involved. Like you'll have to pay again some $50 to $100 to your school to process your OPT application. And then there's a different fee that you are paying to the government, which I think recently was somewhere around $450, if I'm not wrong. So you pay that to the government to let you work for that 1 year and to issue an employment authorization document, which is popularly known as the EAD. So for the EAD, there are these costs that come in. So with the school fee and the service fee, which is the government fee, it's roughly around $500. And it may seem like a lot, but I think you're definitely going to earn more. So you'll recover it. So nothing to worry. Um, yeah, all in all, in Indian rupees, let me do a calculation quickly. So 50,000 and 50,000. So I think it's roughly about 40 lakhs a year, is what I would say. But this is again not including the scholarship money that you save. If you get a 50% scholarship, so out of 35,000, say you'll be down to 17,500, which is rounding it off to say maybe 18,000, 18,000 plus living costs and things like that. You easily straight up, like I think, save around 10 lakhs or something, 10 to 15 lakhs. That is a significant amount if you take it out of 50. So I'm happy to sit down with students if they want to sit down and do a cost analysis. But off the top of my head, these are the costs that I can think of. Um, One advice generally for everything, application procedure, costs, schools, everything, is to speak to as many people as you can before you come to the States. Speak to students, speak to the admissions office, speak to the career services office, speak to professors. Everybody is very responsive. Maybe if you maybe if you reach out to 15 people, 2 or 3 will not get back, but at least at the minimum 10 out of 15 people will be happy to answer your questions, whether it's from school or it's outside professionals. Everybody is happy to help. So I think those are the kind of costs. Now, visa sponsorship is something that when we're talking about visa sponsorship, we're talking about a work permit that happens after that 1 year of OPT. So that's basically if you're applying for, generally people apply for the H1B program. H1B is a different kind of work visa. I just want to put out a disclaimer. I am not an immigration lawyer. This is not legal advice. Please do your own research. Speak to as many people as you need to. And I am only sharing my experience and my knowledge of the process. Please don't hold me to it. This is not legal advice and this is not binding. So H1B process is basically the work visa program. You move from a student visa to an H1B. So you're basically a non-immigrant worker. Um, so you need sponsorship for that because you can't just, start your own practice and be employed. You need your employer to sponsor that for you. And I think the labor laws basically provide usually that the employer has to bear the costs of the immigration attorney and the whole application process. Um, the difficulty with that is one, your employer has to agree to sponsor you and agree to sponsor you from the day basically you start your job. Because what happens is for the H1B, it's a lottery process. There are, I think this year there were some 7 to 800,000 people. That's 7 to 8 lakh people who applied for that. Law, non-law, STEM, non-STEM, everybody. And there's a cap of how many people can get picked in that lottery. So I think the cap is 65,000 and then 20,000 for, so there's 65,000, which is open cap. And then there's a 20,000 cap, which is for people who are in certain professional and masters in STEM courses. So JD gets included in that. LLM also gets included in that, so far as I know. So far as we are concerned, 85,000 is the cap. So out of 8 lakh people, roughly 85,000 people get picked in the lottery, and then your immigration lawyer will work with you to prepare your application and submit it to the government. So getting picked is a very low chance. It's a matter of luck. It may or may not happen, and because we have only 1 year of OPT, we get one shot at this. Sometimes you may get 2 shots at this, and that can happen when you have a job offer while you're still in law school. Assuming that you're going to graduate in May and you're going to start your job in, say, July or August after you prepare for the bar. If you already have a job offer before March, your employer can still apply and put you in that lottery. If you get picked, okay. If you don't get picked, you still have 1 year of OPT. That 1 year of OPT will start from July to the July of the following year, which means there's going to be one more March that comes during this period. And again, March is the timeline for applying for the H-1B lottery, by the way. So if you didn't get picked while you were still in law school, you can get picked the next year. So that's giving you 2 shots at this, which is why it is of utmost importance to try and get a job while you're still in law school and have that conversation with your employer when you're applying or when you're interviewing or when you're accepting job offers, so that they are also prepared. And if it's not in their policy, and if you're okay with just working for a year and then looking at something else, there are other things that you can do, or you want to go back to India, then it's not something that you should be worried about. But otherwise, if you want to stay here and work here, that's how this works. It's a lottery system. So, but having said that, H-1B has two kinds of streams. One is for profit and one is not for profit. So the 85,000 cap that I told you guys about is for the people who work in for profit and private sectors. But if you work with a university, or if you work for an NGO, or you basically work for any organization or even the government that is not for profit, you can get an H-1B without having to go through the lottery scheme. And you don't have to wait for March or the following March or whatever. You can go. The not-for-profit stream does not have any cap, and it gets you basically apply and you get in. And I'm not fully sure of how that process works because I'm not in that stream. I work for a for-profit employer, but from some people who I know are in the not-for-profit stream of this, they didn't have to go through the lottery process. So it's almost like a guaranteed thing, provided your application and your eligibility and all of that is met properly. So that's one thing to do. So you may want to start working at a government department or like a government-owned agency, or maybe an NGO, or work in research in a university, or maybe work with the admissions office of a university. I don't know. There are many options there too. Or law schools also have their, or rather, every university has a general counsel's office and a contracts department. So those are jobs that you can look at basically in higher education. Those would mostly be not for profit. Like I know for a fact that some big private universities we think that they're for profit, but they're also not for profit. So that is one option for jobs that you can look at to avoid the H-1B lottery process. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that, about costs and visa processes. But again, to safeguard you guys, YLCC, and myself, this is not legal advice. This is not binding. Please do your own research, speak to immigration attorneys, speak to other people, take your own decisions.
Right. So with this, I believe we've covered all the important things that we needed to know about the JD program, from the application process, the presentation process, job prospects, and even the costs and the visa related doubts. So thank you so much, Lakshika, for accommodating our request. Despite your busy schedule, I'm very positive this video will be it will be our ultimate guide for the JD program from abroad, and will be of utmost help to everyone who is watching it. Once again, on behalf of ILCC, I thank you for being here with us today, and I wish you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Niharika. I just have a couple of things, if I may add.
Please.
So, everything that I said about the job visa process that applies for JD and LLM students both, the visa is completely independent of your legal studies. That's a government process. I hope most people know that. But just putting it out there, so even if you're doing an LLM, you'll still have the whole OPT process and the H1B process. There are other kinds of work visas that I don't know about but do exist. So you can explore that option with your employer or with a different immigration attorney or by yourself. That's up to you. And one very important piece of advice that I wanted to share with people, and this is especially so for LLMs more than the JDs, but yeah, it equally applies to both, is that your timeline for coming to law school here is going to be August. The first month, the first semester is going to be the most difficult. I mean, don't ignore the fact that you're going to come away from home. You will get homesick at some point. You may or may not share it. It's going to be like a whole different experience. It is going to get difficult at some point, but you will get through it. But the point when I say that is that the first semester is the most crucial, especially for LLMs, is because you're coming in here in August and you think that, okay, the first month I'm going to take some time and, get in. Try to make up your mind, try to have things planned in advance so that the day you get here, you can start networking, you can start with your life, and you don't have to wait for, a month to go by because your semester is hardly 3.5, 4 months long. You're wasting 25% of it by taking that month. Second thing, most of the law firms or other places also where you might want to be applying to hire in advance. They have their application procedures set for 1 year in advance for you to be able to enter there in the summer. So if you come here in the middle of August or end of August, there are chances that there are firms that have already finished their hiring process or are in the process of finishing it. So if you can, after you get your acceptance letters, I think somewhere in March or April, when you have the time, start networking with people, start doing your research, speak to professors in India, speak to professors of the university that you're going to. Very importantly, speak to career services office. Identify the firms or identify other kind of organizations where you think you want to spend your summer interning and start that process from India itself so that you don't miss those deadlines. There are some that hire through, I think, even November and December. But so far as my understanding is concerned, August and September are the hottest months for legal recruitment. Some law firms also hire as early as July. Now, your next question may be, oh, how do I apply? I've not even started my JD. Well, you've already gone to law school in India. Unless you're coming here for a JD right after your 12th grade or right after your undergrad. You've already either been to law school or you've had a few years of experience. Please leverage all of that, especially if you're somebody who's going to be working in international laws. That is important. Leverage your language speaking skill. Like you can speak more than one language, so leverage that. Leverage your work experience. Tell them what kind of skills are transferable. Read job descriptions, see what they're looking for. And I promise you this thing, that this has at least been my experience, that even before you come to the States, if you're admitted into a college and you call the career services office and you tell them that, hey, I just have one summer internship that I can do and I want to go here and I don't know what I can do, they will work with you to review your CV, your cover letters. They'll even, get on Zoom or whatever platform and train you for interviews. They will help you Really, like if you're out there asking for help, they will help you. But it's up to you to ask for help. And I understand coming to the States, we're like halfway around the world. So there's already a lot of emotions, going away from family, a lot of things to pack and all of that stuff going on. But those things are not as important. I mean, family, yes, that emotion, all those emotions, yes, but packing, it it's fine. You'll still get stuff here. It's not like you're not going to get Indian food over here. It's not like you won't get winter clothing over here. You'll get everything. But make some time to speak to people in the school and professionals outside and look at these firms. Try to make a list of at least 30, 40, 50 firms if you can, and start your application procedures based on the deadlines. Because this is one advice that I never got, and I actually did end up missing a whole bunch of opportunities because of this reason, because I didn't know. Because even I was like, and I had work experience before coming here, but I didn't know that I could use that or I could leverage that. And I was like, okay, maybe, after I finish 1 year of JD, then I'll sit for interviews. But they hire 1 year in advance. If they're hiring me at that time, I'm already graduating the next year. So they can't hire me as an intern. And I don't want to be an intern after I graduate, right? So, yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. It's very important to start these things early. And I promise you it'll help. Even if you get rejections, you'll learn from your mistakes. And yeah, the most cliche advice, but the most important, I think I'm just going to wrap up after this, is that network, network, network. Very important. It's what is going to take you to places, not just for jobs, but future recommendations. And who knows, maybe some of them could refer clients to you in the future. So if there's nothing to lose. There's only things to gain from networking. So make that a part of your schedule as soon as you get here, or even start in India. The sooner the better. And that's all. And thank you so much for inviting me. I am so happy that we were able to do this. And I'm happy to speak to more people about this and help them out in their process. And good luck to everybody who's doing a JD or an LLM or a 2 year JD. It's gonna be worth it. Just stay focused on your goals. Don't make decisions because other people are doing things. Just figure out what's best for you, and you'd be fine. I survived. Anybody can survive.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Niharika. You've been a great host.
Thank you so much.